Hey 3DMJers, this is Andrea Valdez, and I want to share 2 chapter videos from our newest course titled Transitioning Away from Tracking. The first video you're about to see is from our team's Chief Science Officer, Eric Helms, where he will be giving a broad overview of nutrition tracking research to help you understand the evidence supporting our rationale for this course. In the second video, our registered dietitian, Steve Taylor, will give an in-depth look at the real-world benefits of not tracking your nutritional intake and delivering some tangible behavior shifts that you can aim for and expect when making this shift. Again, these are just 2 of the videos from our course, which contains 10 full chapters with text supplements and resources about why, when, and how you can make this transition for yourself while still maintaining and even building upon your physique and strength goals. Now, it's important to note that we don't think tracking your nutrition is necessarily a bad thing. There's definitely a time and place for it, and you'll hear more about that in the next 17 minutes. But we do believe there are many advantages to ceasing these behaviors once you're in the right position to do so, and we think this course can help you get there. To learn more about this course from Eric Helms, to sign up for the free trial, or to buy full access, click the first link in the description box below or go to 3dmjvault.com. Again, that's 3dmjvault.com to view all of our video courses, including this new one, Transitioning Away from Tracking. Thanks in advance for checking it out, and enjoy the rest of the video.
In this section, we're going to be discussing a paper of mine, Towards a Sustainable Nutrition Paradigm for Physique Sport, a narrative review, as a way to go over the rationale and the research behind why tracking can sometimes be problematic. Now, this paper, as you can tell by the title, is geared towards physique competitors, coaches, and generally changing the landscape and the culture around how we address nutrition in physique sport. But just because that's the title and that's the focus doesn't mean that these aspects can't apply to weight class restricted strength athletes like powerlifters trying to maintain weight in their weight class or cut weight to make weight for a specific competition, or general population lifters who are either trying to follow a weight loss plan or modify their body composition. This paper is designed to figure out why is it that physique competitors experience higher rates of body image and eating disorder related issues, what the causes might be, and then what can be done about it. And these findings can definitely be applied to you even if you're not a physique competitor. So that's the first thing I want to highlight, is the fact that indeed there are higher rates of both eating disorders and body image concerns among physique athletes. These certain traits are quite common in that the vast majority of competitors do experience uncontrollable urges to eat, obsession with food, and are very afraid of becoming fat. As you can see in a recent meta-analysis, bodybuilders reported higher body image concerns compared to weightlifting non-competitors. And these symptoms, of course, are not in every single individual, but those they are present in, these symptoms are related to anxiety, depression, neuroticism, and perfectionism. Now, it's important to point that out because if we want to address how do we fix these issues, we need to know where they're coming from. And it's essentially 3 areas: pre-existing body image related or eating disorders concerns or certain personality traits, the biological effects of energy restriction on eating psychology, because how the body is affected directly affects the mind. And finally, the attitude toward dietary restraint, and then the behaviors that come out of that, how we monitor and track our nutrition, which is what we're largely going to cover in this course. So in figure 1, we have a diagram that talks about these 3 theoretical drivers of potential harm. And there's modifiable and non-modifiable aspects of each one. So for example, under predisposition, a lot of that we can't affect. This is just kind of the way your brain works, what you might have as a history, what you're bringing to the table. But there is some framing we can do. And a big aspect of how you see your diet and the way your brain operates is related to, do you kind of have a black and white view of foods? And it's very important to shift that if you do. So binary thinking, seeing things in black and white, is highly associated with what we call dietary restraint. What type of restraint do you use? So you're probably familiar with the idea of flexible restraint. This is the idea that you can restrain yourself from food in a way that isn't rigid and doesn't cause you problems. Now, you're probably familiar with this intuitively, and it's probably why you started tracking in the first place. If you got involved with If It Fits Your Macros, it was probably to get away from the kind of the bro science rules that were arbitrarily applied and overly restrictive, kind of the clean versus dirty foods, having to eat every 3 hours, etc., etc. So you might have gotten into If It Fits Your Macros and found it was very freeing. It provided much more flexibility with what you could eat, when you could eat, compared to kind of just eating specific lists of foods that were quote-unquote healthy or unhealthy or clean or dirty, etc. And this was a very freeing experience. However, it's important to note that If It Fits Your Macros, while it's become more popular among competitors, and it's been a good positive shift, and it does share some things with flexible restraint, it's not the same thing. Flexible restraint is actually an attitude, a disposition towards your diet, where you don't see food as good or bad, like if you had a rigid restraint attitude. And in fact, If It Fits Your Macros does not necessarily preclude some of the things that could be considered a rigid restraint mentality. So if you're obsessively tracking your macros, you have to hit them to the exact gram. And if you go off them, it turns into a binge day. Or for example, if you're afraid of eating out, or you will only eat things you can track, or you avoid restaurants, etc. You bring your scale with you everywhere you go. You track in the off season. All these types of things, they align actually a little more with rigid restraint. So changing our mindset to be more flexible is a big step and one of the modifiable aspects of figure 1 here. Now, under biology, obviously, we can't get away from the fact that we have to diet, and there's going to be the negative effects of dieting. When you get into an energy deficit, when you lose body fat, both the acute energy deficit and then the lower and lower your body fat gets can affect you. However, there are evidence-based strategies which can mitigate those aspects, such as not dieting really, really quickly, making sure you have an appropriate setup of macronutrients, micronutrients, etc. Essentially everything I cover in the Muscle and Strength Pyramids, and a lot of what we talked about on 3D Muscle Journey podcast, our blog articles, etc. We cover all of that. And it really comes down to making sure the energy deficit is appropriate, the rate of weight loss is appropriate, that you don't have low energy availability. And we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about that. Really, we're going to focus on the aspects that are much more psychological in nature. And finally, that's where we're going to be really kind of getting into the meat of it, and that's the monitoring aspects. This is what you have to do to ensure that deficit is there, that weight loss is occurring, and that you're successful. So there's physique checking, monitoring your body or monitoring body weight, and there's also dietary tracking. That's the big thing that Steve's going to help you go through the practical ways of modifying that and moving away from tracking towards using more qualitative aspects and still reaching your goals without having to get the scale out and log into MyFitnessPal. And that's where we have the most room to improve. And we're going to talk about the specific research related to that in the final video of this section.
Hi, I'm Steve Taylor, the team's registered dietitian. In the second half of this course, we're going to go through how to transition away from tracking and how you can achieve your strength and physique goals without tracking. Before we get into the material, I want to quickly clarify two things. The first thing is that Eric and I are not anti-tracking. We do not think that everyone watching this should transition away from tracking. Tracking is an extremely valuable process. It teaches us a lot of useful information we can use the rest of our life. In fact, most of the people going through my remote weekly coaching program right now are tracking their intake. The second thing is that this approach, not tracking, is not the best approach in every situation. Some of you watching this video would benefit more from tracking. For example, if you're a bodybuilder and you're at the end of your contest prep and you're really fighting your body's drive to eat, or if you're someone who is currently going through a phase where you're trying to learn the different insights that tracking gives you. If this is true for you, if you're someone who is currently tracking and you plan on continuing to track for the time being, I still encourage you to go through the second half of this course. For one, it contains information that is useful to know right now while you're tracking. It contains information that I wish I would have known when I was tracking. And the second thing is, this way, once you get to a place where you're ready to transition away, you'll have a process for how to do that. With that said, let's dive into the second half of this course. Before we get into the how to transition away, let's first go through, why should we transition away? Tracking works, so why should we even consider another approach? I think the best way to answer this is for me to share some of the biggest benefits that I've experienced since I transitioned away. To be clear, it's not that I'm never going to track again. When I have goals in the future where I feel like it's going to be beneficial to track, I'm going to track. Or if I want to test something out for my clients and I feel it's going to be beneficial to track, I'll track. I haven't needed to track for the last 3 years, and I've noticed a lot of benefits from it. One of the biggest things is I'm more attuned to my hunger and fullness sensations now. Because of that, I've gotten much better at consuming the amount of food that my body feels it needs. For example, let's say I'm eating a meal right now and I feel full. I will stop eating. Before, it's not that when I was tracking, it's not that I couldn't have done that. It's just I was so focused on being precise with hitting my targets and making sure my tracking was 100% accurate that I was always eating until completion versus eating until I felt satisfied. Whereas now, instead of my focus being on accurate tracking and precisely hitting these predetermined targets, my focus is on developing sustainable habits and paying attention to how I'm feeling as I'm eating. What I love is now if I have a day where I'm much more active or I'm much less active than usual, I can adjust my intake accordingly. If I go out hiking all day and I'm much hungrier, I can eat more food. If I'm traveling all day and I'm not moving as much, I can eat less, and I don't have to force myself to eat when I'm not hungry just to hit these predetermined targets. Again, it's not that I couldn't have done that when I was tracking. I totally could have. It's just, it feels a lot more natural now because these adjustments are based on how I'm actually feeling versus calculated estimations and how hungry I think I should be. Another benefit, and this sounds ridiculous, but I eat a more varied diet now. When I was tracking, just the step of having to look up new foods, search different databases, create new food entries in MyFitnessPal. It sounds ridiculous, but just having to go through that step was a barrier to me consuming a more varied diet before. Another huge benefit is I now have more time and energy to put into other areas of my life. Most of you watching this are extremely familiar with tracking. You've been tracking for a while, and so you know that when you first start tracking, it's easy to spend a lot of time and energy doing it. And then as you get better, you spend less time and energy. I don't think it's an overstatement to say that when we're first learning to track, between learning how to use MyFitnessPal, learning how to use a food scale, adjusting all the numbers, looking up in all foods in all these databases, I don't think it's an overstatement to say that we spend 45 minutes a day on average learning the process. From there, as we get better, that number decreases. However, because tracking itself, the process requires time and energy, those things never get to zero. I think it's fair to say that the average advanced tracker spends on average 15 minutes a day tracking. If we take that 15 minutes and multiply it by 365, we get 5,475 minutes. If we step back into my situation now, that means I now have an extra almost 5,500 minutes to invest into my business, my relationships, and other interests, where before I was spending that time and energy weighing meat and adding numbers. Do you know how nice it is to be able to make a sandwich and not have to weigh out all the ingredients and log them in MyFitnessPal? Do you know how nice it is to be able to chop up an apple, chop up some chicken, throw them in a bowl with some spinach, sprinkle on some cheese, almonds, and salad dressing, and just be able to eat the salad without having to punch all of that stuff into MyFitnessPal? Another benefit, and this is one that I wouldn't have even thought about until now looking back, and that is transitioning away increases our confidence. It's a great feeling knowing that I don't need MyFitnessPal, that I don't need a food scale, and I don't need to write down everything I eat to maintain the habits I've developed and the results I've achieved. It's a great feeling knowing that I'm able to achieve the outcomes I'm after without really thinking about them unless there's a major shift in my goals or my daily routine. And the last benefit is probably the hardest one to articulate, but is potentially the biggest benefit. And I'm sure there are some people watching this who have transitioned away, and so you'll totally be able to relate. If not, I think it might just be one of those things that you actually have to experience. And that is, there's just this sense of freedom. There's this sense of freedom of being able to just go through my day, not have to constantly weigh everything out, search databases, put everything in MyFitnessPal. And I hear you, I'm sure a lot of people watching this are saying, it really doesn't take that much time, it really doesn't take that much energy, I don't feel like it's that much of a burden. And I get you, I was there as well. It's just, there's a different level, there's a different sense of freedom when you transition away. And again, it's hard to articulate, but it's a great feeling. Tracking, it's simply a means. It's a process to help us learn about food, our eating behaviors, and our body. Tracking helps us learn about our current habits and establish new ones that support our health, short-term and long-term goals. Once we have these new habits established, the next step is discontinuing tracking, not just because we don't need to do it anymore, but so we can move to a higher level of self-awareness.